Nice to meet you, or maybe nice to see you again. Last week I was introducing Professor Park Young-chul, but today I'm here to give a lecture. And it's my honor to be here and to give a lecture about my specialty. Maybe some of you have heard about my research interests. By the way, I'm Seungho Lee now. I'm currently doing the job of Associate Dean of GSIS. Not because I love it, but because people ask me to do. So that's why I'm doing that. I used to do a year before did my job. Anyway, today I would like to talk about water and global development, which will be very new to you, many of you, but some of you probably taken my course or some special lectures before. And this is a bit different from the general development studies subjects, which are often discussed by many people, sustainable development goals, and also global dimensions, global discourses. But I more like focus on very specific areas, and also sometimes there's a debate between that some very top, for example, including Mr. Ban. We are very proud of Mr. Ban. He's still leading that UN system. And also the people who are interested in how the SDG, as you know, Sustainable Development Goals, will be established in September this year. And then also Korea, we're supposed to go through some public hearings and consultation process. But unfortunately, nobody heard about it. So to some extent, Korea is not really going through that very well consensus building process. But anyway, the world, they've been doing that. So we are about to have a new era. So that as if we have the new goals, Sustainable Development Goals established in September, then now we have a new lifespan from 2015 to 2030. So next 15 years' time, what we are supposed to do, that is going to be a very important step from September. Amongst the many issues, I always emphasize that water is everything. Because what kind of topics, if you're interested in development studies or anyway related to economic development or trade or human rights or climate change, anything, if you do not resolve any water issues, like water issues overall, then you cannot start off any kind of development projects and policies. So this is one of the core issues we have to be aware of and also deal with. Because of that, I would like to give a short lecture. But if you want to know more about it, so please come to my lecture a few years' time, because I might not be available next year. Anyway, today I would like to talk about first problem sheds. Instead of watersheds, that its term has been coined by one of my colleagues, and they replacing the word, the watershed, with the problem shed. So if you have a look at the watershed, in other words, catchments, then you may be able to find many complexity of problems. It's not necessarily only just water supply, water shortage issues, or water quality issues, or flood and disaster issues, but also many, many other related issues. And coping strategies. What kind of coping strategies human beings, we've been working together. And then new approaches. What are the new approaches? Maybe some of them are not really new, but I'm going to introduce the approaches maybe you're not familiar with, and then we're going to have some discussion about what should we do from now on, particularly centered on open water issues. So, lecture aims. I'd like to address lingering challenges global water issues and then resolve elusive challenges through social, economic, and political approaches. So here, I'm not an engineer. So I'm a geographer, I'm trained as a geographer, but also now I'm not really purely very British-style geographer, because British-style geographers, they have their own world. And the very geographical discussions are not really touching upon my research interests. But for me, that's more like development geography, which is related to the development issues, and particularly the lingering discussion, the interface between human social economic development and environmental protection. So rationale, why do we need to focus on water if you're interested in development issues, and particularly that economic development and environmental protection? Because amongst many issues that water, as I said before, because it's a starting point. It's a starting point of any development projects, development policies, and management issues. So water is essential for life. You'll hear anyone that if you do not have any water for at least 3 or 4 days, then you're going to be dead, because our body, consisting of about 70% of water, is now supporting our body, the system. So it's a foundation for any development projects, particularly ODA. Maybe many of you are interested in how you can get involved in ODA projects. Particularly nowadays, Korea, we are pushing forward the ODA projects towards many developing countries. So now people, also there, we're going to have some more increasing consensus that Koreans, we have to show our commitment to development of the global society. So then ODA is one of the very good tools and methods how to realize this goal. So then ODA project, if you have a look at ODA project, particularly now led by KUGSIS, a Korea Development Agency, then almost 60 to 70% of projects, ODA projects, they are related to water. And it's going to be more and more projects going to be related to water. Because of that, you cannot ignore the significance of water issues. The problem shares, what does it mean? What does it mean? Water shortage, pollution, floods, and droughts, and basic sanitation, and water rights, and water conflicts. You name it. There's so many issues involved, and we have to think about it in a very much complex way. Compounded by social, political, and economic underdevelopment. Here that water issues are connected to everything. So that's why I always talk to my students who are taking my course, Water and Development, and after taking my course, then you're now realizing the world is connected to water. Everything is connected to water, because water is also connected to everything. So that how can we resolve these challenges? So if you have a look at this world map, the problem shares now you can see in the world. There are some examples, there are numerous examples, but I have picked up, and some experts that picked up to some cases. For example here, the Yellow River areas that temporarily run dry due to precipitation decrease and irrigation. So that precipitation decrease means that also climate change, or natural phenomenon, and also irrigation means that it's very human, anthropogenic effect. Irrigation means that you are now fetching water from long distance, and then you're watering your own the purposes crops. That yes, maybe you can raise something and you can channel some water from far away, but at the same time then, if you think about the whole balance of water, how much water you have. But irrigation is one of the worst sectors in terms of water use efficiency. Some of you are well aware of some economic efficiency. Then if you get this water and use this one to grow some crop, that requires so much water. Whereas some people think that maybe we need to reallocate water to more high valued added products. So then there are some issues involved that water and development, and also economic growth too. And also here that you can see, that's here, Bangladesh, flood disasters. And so then this country, the Bangladesh, the country has been affected by floods many times. And not necessarily flood, but also other water quality issues. But because of that, their economic development has been very retarded because of this issue. And also other water quality and some water conflict issues, they're everywhere. So we're going to look at these issues one by one later on. So problem shares, increasing water demand, population growth, and economic development have been exacerbating these issues. Increase in agricultural industrial demand for water and water consumption more than doubles since World War II. And the water scarcity and unsustainable supply. 1/3 of the world population now living in water-stressed country. So which means that when you talk of water scarcity, that 1/3 of the whole population in the world, they're suffering from the lack of water. We are not actually exempted from this lack of water too. Although you're not realizing that because you're lucky, you're living and staying in Seoul. We have wonderful multi-regional water supply system thanks to the Paltang River areas, reservoirs, many dams in Han River. So Han River itself is not a river anymore, it's a lake because it has been dammed by many multi-purpose and small weirs for many years. In order to what? In order to supply sufficient amount of water to the more than 20 million people in Seoul metropolitan areas. But then other areas, for example, Gangwon province or somewhere is the Gyeongsang northern province, that people, they do not have some piped water supply. They always suffering from lack of water. Not necessarily in summer, but also winter time too, because water is going to be frozen, so they don't have enough water. And groundwater and also river levels are receding, droughts intensified, Africa, Australia, and also, as you know, because related to climate change, glacier snow melting. And water quality issues becoming very serious, not necessarily only that rich countries, but also developing countries too. So you can see that China, everything is massive, you can see that at a massive scale. So the 2/3 of largest cities in China that no wastewater treatment plants, which means that wastewater has been dumped without any proper treatment. So 1 billion lacking access to safe drinking water and 5 million die each year from related illness. So water-related disasters also becoming very, very important, also critical, and because of the some climate change impact as well. Hurricane Katrina and Cyclone Nargis, and very recently Fukushima earthquake and tsunami, as you can see, and there's some big numbers about this water-related disasters. Having said that, I briefly touched upon that the problem shared issues. Let's think about some coping strategies. Then, yes, our ancestors, not really ancestors, but our previous generations, they've been working hard how to deal with these issues. The first one, maybe you heard about this one, 1992. Some people talk about this one, 1972, that's human environment issues, and back then the conference in Sweden, but maybe we begin to start to talk about this issue from 1992, the Rio Conference, the most famous Rio Conference, when people began to talk about the interface between human and environment. From this very, very iconic international conference, we can think about this Agenda 21, and then if you have a look at this, a number of documents related to 1992 Rio Conference, then you may be able to find many of them, they are related to water issues. There are some examples here. Water resources assessment and water and sustainable urban development. These topics are interestingly, they're still being discussed by many UN agencies. Urbanization, environmental protection, or water quality, food. All these UN agencies that talk about the very similar or almost the same topics they discussed before, more than almost 30 years ago. And Rio Plus 10, 2002, Johannesburg, access to safe drinking water, to halve the people without access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation by 2015. And then after that, also, of course, we will never forget that we got wonderful Millennium Development Goals set. Although there are two major targets, water supply and water quality. In terms of water supply, then we have achieved about 80% of the goals set. But then in terms of sanitation, that we are still very lagging behind. 30 more years to come to meet the target, which is very much disappointing. So because of that, I presume that from the Sustainable Development Goals, they are going to put more emphasis on that sanitation services. Because you have to do sanitation services well, then you can get clean water. And then from the clean water, then all kinds of development issues are becoming to be very much important, including some of you interested in some human rights issues and education issues and child and women, gender, all kinds of issues they are beginning to reshape. So this is one of the interesting posters coming from this UN agencies, particularly talk about this Millennium Development Goals, but environmental sustainability 7 and 7.C. So 2.1 billion people gain access to clean drinking water since 1990, which means that they're now showing off as a, yes, wonderful achievement. Whereas 2.5 billion people do not have basic sanitation services, such as toilets or latrines. So this is a stark contrast. Which area we should focus on, particularly from 2015, September 2015. And then 2012, Rio Plus 20, that we have this achievements and also the pledges. Particularly, they emphasize that we need to highlight that the roles of financing and investment in infrastructure for water and sanitation. And as I discussed before, that now we are about to finalize Sustainable Development Goals in September, and the magnitude of water for global development has been recognized. And going back to the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs do not include any single standalone water-related goal. But this time, because they think that probably, water people, including me, we've been arguing to the international community, look, water is so much important. We should have some separate issue. Maybe that's has echoed well to this the Sustainable Development Goal making process. So now water is going to be a standalone goal number 6. So then, how to have the way forward? Then I briefly touched upon this issue from the very early beginning of my lecture, that technologies and financing. Yes, now after the technology era has been gone, for example, so-called modernity period. So hydraulic engineering or dam building or aqueducts and water supply issues have been too much emphasized. But nowadays, people talk about central point, for example, international the financing institutions such as World Bank and Asian or African development banks. They talk about, yes, financing is very important. Yes, it is. But then the issue is that money is everywhere. If you try to go out there and to work in the development fields, that yes, money is flourishing. They're everywhere. But problem is, how can we connect that financing technologies with that some other policies? Then we need to look at this social, economic, and political dimensions. So before move on to the other sections, and I would like to show this Sustainable Development Goals proposal was temporarily finalized last summer. Then there are 17 goals have been now finalized as a draft. Of course, maybe it may be changed, maybe revised during the General Assembly in UN September. But then, as you can see, blue here, ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. And it has also there more detailed goals. So then I'm very excited to see how this SDG will be taking shape in a few months' time. So coping strategy then, I would like, before moving on to the next section, then I would like to just remind you of what sustainable development means. That this is an official definition coming out from the Brundtland report in 1987. In my lectures, in my course, I often force my students to remember word by word and throughout my exam papers. I'm joking. No, I never ask them to do that because long is too many words, but that at least I'm going to ask them to have some essence from this very long definition. Which means that the equity between economy and society and the environment, and also going back to this sustainable development, the Brundtland report, the definition that you can think about that your generation and your future generation should not be compromised. You should not use too much natural resources. Why? Because you need to protect them for your future generations. So sustainable development issue is always related to long-term goals. So if anyone to talk about sustainable development and that they want to achieve something in a very short period of time, for example, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, but that's completely lie, because sustainable development means it's a long-term process, and you have to be patient. Okay, patience is a key word whenever you deal with sustainable development. And also that, more policy level, you need to think about some equilibrium between economy, society, and the environment. So synergistic system. And also, you need to think about the political bargaining in order to achieve some final goals and final policies related to sustainable development. And also, the important issue is that sustainable development is not a blueprint or action plan, but it's evolving. And also, maybe it depends on people. Maybe every single of you have your own idea about sustainable development, the concept. So that reflects in how the society is also perceiving that sustainable development. So sustainable development, you can see that the influence from the economy and society and the environment will be the same, the even. And here that we're placing the environment with water, then we can think about. But that most important issue here is that you never forget how the political elements are playing a role in this policy making. Much more important. And why? Because political issues are not really well discussed in many UN conferences. They do not want to use that political commitment, okay, political promises, something. Why? Because UN agencies, they do not have any legitimacy to say something towards national political leaders to do something, because they don't have any law enforcement power. Because of that, politicians are very smart to always try to keep their hands clean by not showing what their roles are. Because of that, the political issues are often they're covered and hidden. But you have to think about that political dimension. And I would like to introduce one very recent achievement from the 7th World Water Forum, which was taking place in middle of April last month. I was in Daegu and Gyeongju. They're going on in Gyeongju as well as Daegu. And from then on, there are many, many interesting discussion points. One of them was the project I have been involved for more than 4 years. It's called Water and Green Growth. Water and Green Growth. As you understand, green growth was initiated by Korean government in 2008. Very iconic day of Korea, the Independence Day, 15th of August 2008, by another Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, he proposed this idea, and then he emphasized that, yes, we are now going to have this wonderful governing philosophy, green growth. Since then, during his tenure, everybody was wearing green jacket, and green vest, and green tie, and green blouse, maybe, I don't know, green something skirt. Anyway, people are so much into that green growth issues, and then they're trying to connect that green growth issues with water. So that after a few years of discussion, we managed to produce report. And then, as you can see, that there are 3 pillars. We are following that, exactly the track of sustainable development, economy, environment, and also society. So first, water as engine for growth. And the second, you can see, protection, conservation of water resources. And also third one, for society, water for improved quality of life. So we are now talk about this sustainable development, although it's now more than how many years? More than 20 years, almost now going towards 30 years. Maybe some people say, oh, it's too old. Maybe we need to have some new philosophy, new ideas. But if you go back to that sustainable development, the reason why now reminding you of that, the real definition of sustainable development is because we are going backwards. Some people say backwards, but it's going forward. Because we have very forward thinking beyond that sustainable development. And then it's time to think about how the sustainable development is connected to some other environmental elements, particularly water. That's why this project has been hailed as a very good, successful one in the 7th World Water Forum. So now the last part of my lecture is to introduce some new approaches, how to resolve this complexity of challenges. The first one is virtual water and water footprint. The virtual water was coined by Professor Allen in the University of London. And when he was looking at some of the reasonings why that Middle Eastern Northern African countries, they're still surviving, confronted with water shortage. And he realized, because these countries, they have imported large amounts of food from other countries. That's one good example is that Egypt. Egypt, if you think about Egypt and the Nile is coming together at the same time. Because for Egyptians, the Nile is just lifeline. Because if you look at the hydrological profile of Egypt, then without Nile, there's no water resources, almost. 99% of the water, total water availability in Egypt, they're coming from the Nile. Because there's virtually no rainfall. So anyway, Tony Allen, he looked at this issue and realized Egypt has been okay, although the water was running out in the 1970s. And then realized, because Egypt has been importing food from other countries. So he got this interesting theory that the virtual water means that you can't really see the water, but the water is already embedded in particular products. First, starting from the agricultural products, but later on, livestock products, and now industrial products too. So any kind of goods, human beings, we have been manufacturing, they're all having some water, including all kinds of clothes, even there's some plastic bottles and all kinds of gadgets here, they're all including and containing certain amount of water. And then this one is talk about the nexus between water, food, and trade. Maybe some of you had heard about this nexus. I don't know why the people are now trying to make things like me, researchers like much harder, because the water issues are very complex, as I emphasized several times, but now they try to combine water, with food and trade. And now there's climate change and energy. There's so many issues coming together. But anyway, these are all interrelated, so you can't really think about the development issues just one by one. So you need to connect some issues with the other ones. And so you need to provide the linkage. That is going to be your job in the next generation. When you work in the development fields, then you need to show the linkage. That's going to be a very, very important part for your research as well as also some practical products too. So nexus between water, food, and trade, 10% for domestic industrial use and 90% for food, which is striking. Striking because we just take for granted if you go to supermarket and you can buy all kinds of different food items. So that you think that, oh, they're coming from somewhere. Yes, coming from somewhere, but then consuming so much water. Right? So the agricultural water requires so much water, much, much more than any other water users. For example, industrial users or domestic users. Of course, there are some other exceptions. For example, here the UK, they got only 1% of water for agricultural use because the UK, they do not really grow anything. They're just importing from all other countries. It's a joke, of course, that there are some it's a British something you can find from the British supermarket, but very rarely. And water footprints are coined by Hoekstra, that's the Dutch economist. And there's some definition. These virtual water footprints. The difference is that water footprints is providing more information and more practical approaches to how to measure how much virtual water is traded, imported or exported. So this is a virtual water concept. H2O is embedded in the sack of rice or wheat, and then imagine that 8 countries now exporting that certain amount of rice or wheat to B country, so then vice versa, B country is importing that food from this A country. So now water is traded. Now you can visualize how the virtual water is traded and also the embedded in different products. So this world map is also interesting. You can see that very different trade transactions between countries from left-hand side to right-hand side. If you look at the left-hand side, that you're familiar with Northern America and North America and also South America, then they're rather green, which means that they're exporting water to other countries because presumably they have relatively large amount of water resources. But if you're going towards that right-hand side, you can see yellowish and pinkish, not really pinkish, reddish, reddish, and then light green. Although, because it's a macro data, it does not necessarily provide some detailed information about each country's water resources. But yes, they got some information that Northern Africa and European countries, as you can see, they are lack of water and becoming very, very serious, like UK and Spain and Germany, and also the Northern African too. So you can see the virtual water balance. And also there's some interesting information for you. Some of you have some favorites. For example, pints of beer. If you drink pints of beer, they're required to produce the pint of beer about to have 170 liters of water required. Okay, no wonder you have to visit loo very often. And also, if you fancy drinking coffee every day, right after or being awake, and then drink coffee, you can see 125 milliliters of coffee required to have about 140 liters water. Quite a lot. But then my British friend, he asked me that, Seungho, why don't you drink more tea rather than coffee? Why? Because if you look at a cup of tea, you can see here, that cup of tea, 250 milliliters, even, yes, larger amount, then only requires 35 liters water. So think about it, okay? No coffee, right? And other more striking issues is that cotton tea, you can see cotton tea. I know that the ladies are very love to go out shopping, and also often you buy some products from SPA brands, but they are the enemy of water protection, so conservation people, because they consume too much water. It's size medium, not small or large, and cotton tea requires to have 4,100 liters water, because cotton itself requires, they're sucking up large amount of water. So this gives us some kind of warning that look, you have to do something by yourself. Not necessarily only for the decision makers at a large scale, but also smaller scale, then it gives some very strong signal to the people that, look, you have to change your water consumption behaviors. So water, food, energy nexus, as I said before, that's also another attempt to combine the water with other elements. And food supply chain efficiency, you need to increase that. And water use efficiency in energy production. So nuclear power plants, cooling water, seawater through desalination, impacts on ocean environments. Yes, because they are discharging. After using this cooling water, then because they've been used to cool down the heat coming from the fission process in nuclear reactors. And after that, the water is rather warm. If the nuclear power plants, they discharge water into local coastal lines, then the seawater is becoming warm, and then it also disrupting the ecosystems. You need to think about the issue. And also, when you have some piped water supply, sanitation services in a very much central systems, then you require to have large amount of electricity. Without electricity, you cannot really pump up the water to somewhere. So this is one of the interesting slides. You can find there's some water and energy nexus. And also here that you can see energy, food, and water. Then, so we got some kind of green picture that's what would happen in the future. The water increasing demand by 30% by 2030, and food increased demand 50% by 2030, and also increased demand 50% by 2030. So you can see different UN agencies there now providing this information. So climate change water, then you have, maybe you're familiar with the climate change discussions, like COP 18, 19, 20, 21. 21 is going to be held in Paris the end of this year. But also interestingly, climate change people, they have no idea about how climate change issues are related to water. So climate change specialists, they got just switched off about water issues. But very, very importantly, water is one of the most important elements to give impacts directly on climate change. Of course, vice versa too. Impacts of climate change on water and global development, you can see that now intensifying the extremes, greater uncertainty and in quantity and quality of supply over the long term. So now, when you talk about climate change, that some commonalities are that, yeah, things are getting worse in a different way. For example, flood issues, yes, you're going to have more and more rainfall. And then drought issues, you're going to be drier and drier because of climate change. So these are some complexity, so linkages between the different elements, greenhouse effect, and also the human activities and other. Okay, let's move on. Let's skip this one. And the last thing I would like to share with you is that the transboundary water issues, which is one of the current research interests. My thesis students, most of them, they are focused on Mekong because I forced them to do that. So if you're interested in Mekong, please come to me. Okay, any kind of river, if you're interested, you can come to me. Yes, not necessarily the Mekong. All right, the Mekong, but then apart from Mekong, there are other international conflict issues, particularly around the river. That you can see the Jordan, the Tigris Euphrates, the Nile, and multi-country dialogue and cooperation required. And recently, there's one good news for water people who are concerned about transboundary water issues. Last August, then for the first time in human history, we managed to establish that first international freshwater law. And after getting the signatory of the 35 countries in the UN. But they prepared the draft in 1997. But since then, after so many years, we managed to have this one. But there are still debates going on because South Korea was invited, but the South Korean government, they decided not to join this, the international freshwater law. Because of that, there's always debates going on how much that this law can be applied to that countries in the world level or only 35 countries. We have to wait for a while. The last two slides about Mekong, the Mekong River Basin. There are 6 countries involved in transboundary water issues, starting from China. China is upstream and the most powerful country. And because of that, the other downstream countries, they got nothing to say. They're just waiting, and because China has been building many dams, and also China, they've been providing large amount of unofficial foreign aid to these least developed countries. Because of that, the here is kind of the game led by China. And unfortunately that many people predict that in the future, Mekong is going to be like this. So then Mekong is not going to be river anymore, it's going to be lake, because it's going to be dammed by the many different countries, particularly centered around here. Which is this country? Can you recognize this country? This one? Laos. Thank you very much. Yes, Laos. And next one, the Vietnam. But Laos they want to be the battery of Asia, together with China. So then the dimension about this Mekong is that economy and ecology. So in other words, the environment or water, the nexus. You can see the hydropower is one of the most important discourses among these countries. Why? Because apart from China, maybe Thailand, but also these countries, including these countries, all of the 6 ripening countries, they are interested in that boosting their local economies in various ways. And then at the same time, but we need to think about this dimension: fish, sediment, ecosystems, and biodiversity. So then in between, you can find this sustainable development. So how can we support that sustainable development in the very much heating debates about supporting economic development? It will be the key. So my conclusion, problem shared. Now you can see, I hope you're realizing that although it's very sketchy, I would like to give a very short summary of all kinds of challenges at the global level. So past experiences, yes, we've been working hard, still a long way to go. But then one last message I would like to deliver to you is that water issues, although sound like some kind of science and natural environment related or maybe technology matters, but in the essence is social, political, economic matters, because we are competing to use this water. Everybody needs this water. Because of that, we have to be aware of these social, political dimensions. Thank you very much.